Okay, so I'm going to ask each of you to just answer that question, either what's still resonating with you or what was something that sometimes when a panel ends or a session ends, you go, oh, I didn't say that thing, or I wish we'd had time to say that thing. So either what's resonating with you or what was that thing that you didn't quite get to. Um, let's see. Let's start with Alex.
Hi, everybody. Alex Mela, she, her, hers. So much is still sticking with me. So much has happened since we were last here. But I just really want to, first of all, I think I was so inspired by all of the rest of my panelists. But I particularly want to lift up Vicky in her presentation. What happens when you like bring the artist's work to the fore and let it speak for itself is something that cannot be explained with all of our like amazing language about representation and all of these words that obviously have a lot of meaning, but there's something that art can do that pierces, that just does so much more. And so I just want to thank you, Vicky, for sharing your presentation the way that you did. Just hearing those sounds, seeing the work, it really made me miss our access to theater again. And it made me really want to share with you all that are here today, even though we're in this moment where we don't have access in the same way to artists, to live work, I'm encouraging myself, so I want to encourage you, let's also not get lost in just the easiest art to access or the art that is the most promoted, marketed, or shared, that there is still this world that I promise represents you, that you're going to see yourself in. And we have to do that work to find it. I have to constantly, and this is my job, right? Like, so I guess I wanted to kind of start from a place there of really celebrating the artist, the risk taking, the daring to dream outside of what has been given to us, to create work that looks nothing like what we have seen before, and just the power in that exploration, the power in expanding the limitation of the imagination that we've been born into in the United States, in this era, in this moment, in this time. So really just a thanking of the artist and the artist spirit. So yeah, we'll come back to me, I'm sure, but I kind of want to, I think that's it.
That's beautiful. I so appreciate that. And I love that idea of exploration, that it's the part of our work is to explore and to find these things that resonate with us. We lost Donna. Hopefully she will rejoin. I'm going to go to Vicky now. Vicky, can you share your pronouns? Thank you, Alex, for doing that. And then what's still resonating with you, or what do you kind of wish that you had said the first time around? Oops, you're still muted, I think.
No, she, her, hers. Vicky, hi. Well, it's really exciting to have a chance to hear from this invisible. I mean, sometimes in the theater it's invisible, your audience, but this is really, it's very exciting. But I'm really happy to hear from you. Certainly, all the panelists really touched me, and I've been following up what they've said and the books they recommended, and I continue to want to have that conversation. I reread Peter's manifesto, and I'll just say, and you go and find this in his transcript, just the place where he says, "So you let us know when you're ready to sing Happy Birthday twice." Just saying, go there. It's really good. That was a really good takeaway. Better than Piss on Pity, as far as I'm concerned. So, but I did have this so some of what I've done is to just pay much more attention and bring it to the resource guide of people of color within the disability movement who are moving this forward, and hoping that we can expand that. So I want to encourage people to look at disability justice and intersectionality. But I do have really good statistics, so I'm going to share it with you. So speaking of whitewashing, okay, and this is not, I don't believe in the Olympics of discrimination and suffering. I think certainly there are certain situations that all of us suffer from these slings and arrows of discrimination and prejudice. But this is just, it's so extreme that I think, for me, it's funny. So since 1988, 1/3 of the Oscar lead actor winners portrayed a character with a disability. 1/3 since 1988. And none of those actors had a disability. So that's the story. And they mean actors. They honor the actresses. So we're not even considering the actresses, of which there were two. There was Hilary Swank with $1 Million Baby, which is a movie I can't even bear to see. I find it so offensive. I mean, I know it will be, and I'll get so upset. And at the end of this, I'm going to post two documentaries to watch that I think that are made by disabled artists that are really good. And just a shout out that the 30th anniversary of the ADA is 2 or 3 days away. So I had no idea that when we started this, that we would be coming up on that. So that's that. That's me.
Thank you so much. Wow, that is a stunning statistic, Vicki. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that.
And then what kind of stories are they telling because of that and why it works?
Yeah. Thank you. Peter, let's go to you. What's resonating with you, or what was something that you wanted to add?
I mean, I'm actually sitting on this statistic that Vicki just gave. It's hitting me hard in a way. You know, I've had this kind of, I've held on to this general belief that in a truly equitable society, in an ideal world, a lot of these identity politics would be less crucial, and like we could live in the world of theater where people are crossing boundaries and identities and playing those different things, because that's the world of theater and imagination. But because of a history of inequity, a history of oppression, and how some of these forms of either blackface or cripface or yellowface have perpetuated that, in a way that kind of art form has been tainted to perpetuate oppression and deny representation. And I find that kind of sad because I don't think writers should be restricted to only writing their own experiences, because then like you only have that person on stage essentially to a degree. But that there needs to be an actual training and due diligence in other experiences. And also like jumping back to that statistic, it suddenly just makes me think, what is it that is so quote foreign about disability that when someone performs it, like that it's suddenly like oh, that's so unique and amazing and sort of thing. And what a difficult challenge that was, sort of thing. And so I'm struck by that, because I think that was also true when it came to like aspects of racist portrayals. It's like, oh, that Mickey Rooney really got into that Asian character, or that Laurence Olivier really embodied that Black experience. You're just like, did they? Because there was, and I'm curious, can someone actually do that? Can that actual due diligence happen? But right now it doesn't come without that baggage of the history and the pain. And so I don't know if that's something that we actually could understand or explore right now. That's kind of what's resonating with me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's actually a question that had come up a lot in the first session too. So I do want to come back and talk about kind of storytelling and the responsibility of storytelling. Because I think that is a place where there aren't easy answers in a lot of situations, or it's more nuanced and layered, you know? Yeah, so I would love to hear from others on that in particular. But first, I want to go to Donna. Donna, I know you've been having computer and sound issues, so we will see if your computer is deciding to cooperate. But can you talk about what's been resonating with you and anything else that you want to kind of bring into the space as we get started?
Yeah, I think that Zoom is, revolting against me for not updating. So that's on me, but I'm not going to. The things that are resonating now, of course, are so different than the takeaway, right? From before. And I hope that we can unpack it. I know there's a lot to cram into one conversation. But yeah, like everyone else, I'm sitting with that statistic and I'm looking at how that would be reflected in other communities today, right? And this idea that I wonder if the revolution, I wonder if the change could be more inclusive. And by that, I mean, people tend to be mono-focused, right? And we've seen that, you know, the last time that we did this, the political climate, the uprising climate was a lot different than it is now, right? Those fires started. Can you hear me? Okay, it says that, okay, it tells me when you can't hear me. That's good to know. So my takeaway, there was so much. Peter, I've been really thinking about this idea of, because we're all educators here, and there are a lot of educators watching, this idea of what our job as educators are to teach, right? And by that I mean teach about the work of decolonization, the work of being anti-racist, right? And all that comes with that, especially that emotional labor. And I've been thinking about that a lot in the last couple of weeks as the focus shifts from direct activism to more community-based organizing, and the ways that, that we can make space for that in a respectful way. Speaking of identity politics, I mean, it's said that like people of color, you know, as Indigenous and Black people in particular, queer people, that we have to be advocates of our own liberation because nobody else is going to do it, right? I don't know that that's always true anymore. I don't know, I don't want that to be true. You know, if I see a bilingual play, or the artist or the director, even the playwright's job is to like translate the language and the nuances of the culture, then I'm not witnessing that correctly, right? I'm not absorbing that correctly. Or if I'm watching a play in African-American vernacular, it's not for other people to articulate what that experience is in a way that I can then connect to it. It doesn't have to be my truth in order for me to truly appreciate it. And I think that simply enjoying and witnessing that experience is what theater is about, is creating that empathy and then moving forward with it. And I, as an educator, I am challenged and overcome with joy that I get to, number one, say I don't know, but then also answer other people's I don't knows, right? And create that. And if I don't know it, then other people on this panel might. That being said, I have spent a lot of my education in PWIs, K through 12s, didn't have a Black teacher until I was in grad school, despite living in LA. And like I'm sure a lot of us have, I've internalized a lot of aggressions and bigotries and prejudice. I don't believe that I have an obligation to teach in the American theater. Not me, right? Like in the age of information, a Black woman who works in a field that has continuously commodified and capitalized on BIPOC experiences, that is not my job here. And that part, like my job includes labors of love, right? Like if you're porous and, can you hear me? Did I block out again? Yeah, okay. And trying to, what was I saying? And trying to unpack that experience and willing to expose yourself in that process, then yes, we can definitely move forward. But I leave that work up to people like on this panel, like Peter, your exquisite poem. There's no way that I could say that, right? Because number one, I don't want to anymore, you know, and that's real because scars are thicker than skin, right? But also I think the reason that we are in this tide is because there are so many people advocating for BIPOC and their experiences and other marginalized, underserved communities, right? I am here to concede my space to offer platforms for that, because you can go home and read a book. So yeah, I'm going to sort of leave it at that. And I would love to hear from the other panelists about this, because I'd love to know, do you teach? And if so, how and when? And at what point do you stop and say, go home and Google?
That's a great question. Is that resonating with folks? Anyone want to jump in on that? Alex, you?
Yeah, first of all, I just thank you for sharing that, naming that. I'm just so obsessed with you. I'll just say that I'm a very light-skinned person, and so I feel the responsibility you're talking about, Donna, to do that, to speak out for, with, about, to use energy that I have not had to have drained from me in the same way you have. And that is like, it's not a responsibility from the outside, like it is from the inside. It is and it is not something I get to stop because I'm tired, right? So whereas, and I think I need to make the space to keep saying I run a theater company of women of color, of all skin varieties, and we have made the conscious effort in the last 5 years in ways we haven't to say, how are we trying to say we're all equal here? Distribution of labor is the same here, but actually that's not right. How do we disrupt that? Us thinking we're so progressive, so radical, still need disruptions. So I think it's so powerful to have that disruption. In terms of like the when do you say to go Google, like all the time. Like I think all the time, because I can't teach you everything you need to know. I'm still learning all the time. That's the other thing. I think the one thing I want to enter here is, particularly for educators and for students, is like, there is no endpoint to that learning journey. The second you think you know everything, stop teaching, because you shouldn't be if you think that. And the thing I bring to the table as a director that I think makes my facilitation work better is I know better than to say, or I know when to say, I don't know, and when to use that as an empowering thing and not a thing to make you shrink. Now, in rooms when you're a BIPOC or marginalized in whatever kind of lane you're marginalized, we're not always allowed to say, I don't know. It is a diminishing thing, but for me, that's the work I want to do. I get to say, I don't know too. And then I get to launch from that. So that's maybe my answer somewhat to what you're sharing.
Awesome. Thank you. I think, Vicky, did you want to speak to that as well? No? Peter?
Oh, so many words and thoughts and feelings. Yeah, like, it's so fun. I feel like you hear certain phrases and thoughts over the years, and especially living in a lot of social justice circles, I hear things and I go, huh, I think that's true, but I don't think I understand that yet. And then you come back and go like, oh yeah, I get what that means, kind of like even terms like modern day slavery. Like when I heard that term, I was just kind of like, okay, but it's not like what were we talking about? Like we're not talking about like traditional, whatever the hell that is, but like this recognition of, everyone's getting paid now, and then at some point in my journey going like, everyone's not getting paid fairly, and actually the system is set up to force people to work in ways that some aren't being compensated actually, or the whole prison to pipeline system. Like there's so many different, like I think what Alex is saying, you learn more and more and more, and suddenly more and more things make sense. Someone just posted on Facebook this dichotomy of like wanting more BIPOC leadership or BIPOC representation against, but BIPOC shouldn't educate. And I'm like, yeah, they shouldn't. But the whole idea that white supremacy set up the system. And so those who have reaped the benefits of white supremacy, and that includes those of us who have adjacency to whiteness, and I include myself in that, have to do the labor to undo that because we've reaped the benefits and we are actually in a better position to do that. The idea that we, like whatever comfortable or relaxing is as the default of our world right now, for certain folks, like what that comfort level is all over the place for everyone. Everyone's safety levels are all over the place. And so we have to equalize that, and that's going to force certain individuals into discomfort to be able to make the space of comfort more for open up for others. And when I say comfort, part of that is purely, I think, you know, what I'm saying in my manifesto, it's health related, actual, and like this idea of someone's like, someone was, oh gosh, I was in a conversation with, I've been in so many panels with so many conversations where someone said, well, when it's Black Lives Matter, like they're talking about the violence and police brutality. And I said, yes, and everything else that happens to Black individuals that diminishes their lifespan. And we talked about Black individuals. You know, also this includes trans individuals. This includes people with disabilities. This includes women, like so many individuals in which mental, emotional, and physical labor diminish their life capacity. Their access to jobs and money and wealth diminishes life capacity. Like that's what that actually means. And so we have to acknowledge that we are literally killing certain people by diminishing their life capacity because of the way the system is set up. And if you're okay with that, I have questions. But once you recognize that, that's when you have to realize, my comfort comes at the expense of other people's lives, and that needs to change. I went on a million tangents, I'm sorry.
It didn't feel like it. It felt like that.
Okay.
All there. And I'm taking notes. That's why I keep looking over here. But I really appreciate the discussion of discomfort and sitting with your discomfort. And then discomfort is a part of this work. Sometimes it can also be very joyful, but that it's okay. It is okay, and it is sometimes necessary to feel uncomfortable. Or I love the framing of like when you hear something in a new way or you hear new framing, sometimes it takes a minute to go like, wait, what? And you sit with it, and then you're like, I get it, I understand. I'm on board. So thank you for introducing that.
Well, if I may really quickly, and then I'm more than happy to lean back in the conversation. Gosh, you all just like popcorn my brain, and I'm like, there's so many different roads that we need to drive down, to be honest. But I would really like to speak directly to the BIPOC people, in particularly Black and Indigenous people who are young people, institutions, yeah, who are working, yeah, am I good? I don't know why this is happening, who are in all of these different educational institutions and organizations, all of that. People who are still learning is the joy of my job. From being an educator to being an actor to being a director and then everything else, right? To being a parent. There's always someone coming up behind you, and you don't, like Peter said last time, you don't know what you don't know. You know, and the work in any of our lives, art or leadership or otherwise, is to quiet our need to know what we're doing and relinquish control, and then deal with your heart and your spirit, right? That's my job as well. That being said, and I'm so proud of the work that I see in self-care for a lot of people, particularly BIPOC people. You know, it's previously we were taught respectability politics to make ourselves small and all of that. And I really do see the movement forward being accelerated because time is a construct, right? And so you can have something that takes 70 years, like with John Lewis. I really believe that we have the tools now to accelerate all of that. And make that change. But again, I don't know that it's going to come from the people who have been doing it since John Lewis. I think it's going to come from the other people who are witnesses and can speak up and can affect the change that way, and who can say, hey, we've never had a BIPOC leader in this organization our entire lives, or you know what I mean? Like, let's go ahead and step up now. Let's hire Nataki Garrett. That sort of culture shift. I'm seeing it happen, and I'm hoping that whatever happens to theater on the other side of this, it's so much more inclusive of that philosophy more than anything, and that BIPOC people are practicing self-care and joy. And then I'm gonna be quiet.
Thank you. You can, I want all of you to speak up as much as you can. I'm just like, Alex, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, but Vicky, go ahead first.
I have a solo show from a few years back called Stuck. I won't say any more about that, but it starts with, I'm going to start in the beginning because I'm going to start in the middle because I'm tired of starting at the beginning. So I'm going to assume you know all about Richard III and Tiny Tim and why handicapable is such an annoying term. Okay, cut to. So, and I'm probably the oldest. I am the oldest person on this panel, and there is a fatigue that comes from starting from the beginning over and over and over again. So I am like, that's why I'm so excited about these two documentaries. They're made by very smart, very activist, very skilled artists. Crip Camp, which was the Obama's second film for Netflix, the second documentary and that's on Netflix and it's free if you have Netflix. And then Code of the Freaks, which is the smartest analysis of disability images in films from the beginning. So anyhow, so those are satisfying because then I can show those and I don't have to go through all of that. So, I'm really interested in the intersectionality of health and race and disability and environmental justice. That, you know, it's the fact that why are the statistics so high for Black and Latinx people in COVID? Why is that going on? And the idea is still the stigma around disability. So mental disability, people will still not claim that. So all of these murders that are happening to people of color who have mental disabilities, nobody wants to bring that up because it makes them look like it's their fault that it happened or whatever is happening with that stigma. And if those things aren't brought up, then the policies won't address them. If you're still sending cops to take care of people that are having mental episodes, it's lethal. It's a lethal solution. So I just love listening to everyone talk, and I know that all of those 70 people who are out there listening are, I know from the young people that I work with, much more impatient, you know, like, yeah, I want to talk about disability. I want to talk about trans. I want to talk about race. I want to do something about all those things. So that's my incoherent response, Camille.
Not incoherent. I love that. I wrote in the chat, be impatient. I think that's yes, be impatient. Alex, did you want to?
Yeah, I love all of this. I feel like we could talk about this for a century. And I do just want to bring into the fold that the reason it's going to sound like I'm taking responsibility for Gen Z. I'm not. The reason the next generation is this way is because of the sacrifices, though, of how the dialogue has moved forward, even just like in our lifetime. But I'm just not an incrementalist, and I'm not like, and we'll keep waiting for 3 more, right? Like, and knowing that the work is going to take many more, but there's something about that privilege, that luxury to be born into this moment and era is so exciting and inspiring. And I just want to, it's making me think about rest. It's making me think about, I don't know if you all know Sonia Renee Taylor's book, The Body's Not an Apology. She's an amazing, brilliant thinker. Please go watch her. Her book is amazing. And this idea of like, for those of us who the world is not designed for our bodies, the world is not designed for our needs, the fight is also like doing the fight, doing the teaching, doing the dismantling rather than building. Like, I think I was born with gifts to build, and yet, so it is my responsibility to figure out how much work am I doing dismantling and how much work am I doing building, how much work am I doing dismantling other people's mess that they made, right? How many artists have we missed out on in our generation because they have been fixing someone else's problem rather than gifting us with the art that they were born to give us. And it is directly related to those statistics. In Chicago, 20 years of age you are losing by living on the South Side versus living on the North Side. I mean, obviously not by living, but what that means and who's living there, and the pollution and the situation and the microaggressions and the amount of what's that chemical that is like racing through us when we're always in fight mode, which is like what so many Black and Indigenous, I'm going to speak from the women perspective, are experiencing every single day, right? Like, so it is scientific. But when I think about it within the frame of like, how much time am I gonna make for building versus dismantling, knowing that I have to do both? Or not, you can choose your lane, whatever works for you, but we have to do that thinking. Don't just be pushed into a lane because you see it. Don't just be pushed into a lane because it's a need. Always think about what's my need, right? So that's what I wanted to offer.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, and what are you skilled at? What are you, I think that's part of it is, it's interesting. I think you see a lot of BIPOC folks end up in EDI conversation, or people who are marginalized in EDI conversations simply because of their identity and not because they're actually skilled, willing, and knowledgeable on the subject. And so then there's a setup of failure that often happens. And I see it all the time. And I think what's interesting for me is I thought that was something that was happening to me. I started being like, I need to run away from this. But I realized it is something I actually am skilled, knowledgeable, and I enjoy doing. And I take that in. But I also have been like, there's been a lot of abuse of that knowledge and power that people have taken advantage of me. And so I've now realized this is a value that I have, that I need to be compensated for. On the other hand, those who are not skilled or knowledgeable on this don't do the work of educating other folks, because you actually might be perpetuating incorrect information. If you actually want to learn this stuff and how to teach, everyone needs to learn like this stuff, yes, but then to teach it is a different skill set. And then actually assess if that's something that you're passionate about and skilled and want to be doing. The reason I bring this up is because some things that were talked about that I want to touch on is there are two things that I've learned how to, and why I'm willing to sit in this spot, is I have an incredible meter of compassion for ignorance now that not everyone has and not everyone needs to have, and that's okay. But I think it's because I think of my mom, who's an immigrant Chinese woman, and like she's ingrained and instilled a lot of like the white supremacist and white exceptional models. And so when I sit and I talk, I get very frustrated sometimes when I talk to my mother, as most people do with their parents, but I also sit there and go, I care about you enough to want to talk you through this conversation and how anti-Blackness has been intentionally seeped into our community. And what that looks like and how that works. And to me, I've seen over the years progress, and it's because I approach that conversation both with passion, but also at times compassion, because I know that she is, and many people in this country are a byproduct of the system. And when I get mad at individuals sometimes, I usually have to stop and go, I'm mad at the system actually. And they're a product of that. And I have that capacity, but not everyone does, and they shouldn't have to, and that's okay, because other people, I go back into like my white adjacent privileges. I haven't had the stresses of being a woman, of being dark skinned, of being trans. Like that hasn't weighed on me as much. Yes, I have some difficulty as a queer heavyset Asian, but those are different, like there are different degrees. And so that's one thing. And the other thing that I feel like I've learned how to navigate, so that's like dealing with ignorant folks and white folks for the most part. Working with those who have been marginalized is actually another skill set in itself. We talk about this discomfort of when we're learning something new, and that's usually because we're filling in gaps of ignorance. I'm learning something about a marginalized community. It works the other way around. When a marginalized member comes into power or privileges, it's very new and it can be very uncomfortable. And so there also can be a moment of rejection of it, running away from it, when they don't know that's what's happening. And as someone who sits in that middle, I want to be able to recognize this person is growing into their power and they need support in that, or else I'm setting them up to fail. Many marginalized folks haven't had the entire history of their lives to get used to a certain kind of power or privileges that are being granted to them. And so they can screw up when utilizing it. And that is often used as a reason why it should not be given back to them. And that's bullshit. Excuse my language, but it's bullshit. It's like, well, they don't know how to handle it. I'm like, they haven't had the 10, 15, 20 years of experience y'all did to be able to learn how to work with it. So that is another kind of thing to kind of recognize, is we've been taught to push it off. So it's not that we don't deserve it or we shouldn't live in it. It's the system is set up to not allow us to have it. And so now we run away from it. Anyways, blah, 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 yada, yada. Go ahead, love y'all.
They have had the 10, 15 years. They have had it because these are the same theaters who produce August Wilson and they see what generational traumas look like, right? These are the same producers who know that if they cast a Black person in the role of Friends with Guns, it really depends on who you cast, right? And which role you're casting, because people come in with preconceived notions and you're mindful about that. If you're talking about your parent all day, right? Like, I'm more than happy to show up in those ways. When it comes to institution and structural organization and change, I very often, when I'm in these spaces having to explain these things, I use the analogy, especially for white women, white feminists, I use the analogy of, imagine that instead of talking about BIPOC, I'm talking about women. So if we put that here, that men are having a really hard understanding from the perspective of women, how they can show up for women, because they're brand new to this and they need a woman to explain to them why their life matters, or why they need to say their stories on stage, or why one woman in an entire organization is tokenism. You would look at me as if I were bananas, right? Because I'm muted right now, but yeah, okay. Anyway, I think they have had, most of them have had the time and have had the blinders on. And I'm so grateful that some of them are removing them by all means. But I'm no longer in front of you doing this. Now I'm over here. Someone else is in front of you doing this.
This is awesome. Thank you all. Okay, so there's been a few questions around, and I'm going to pull up. I picked one out that we're talking about this. There are a bunch of people wondering about how to change the culture within their institution if they're not in a position of power yet. So several questions around that from a school perspective. So like, as a student, how do I influence the culture within an organization? Does anyone have initial thoughts on that? And that question gets asked in various ways.
Well, at my school, it's a small liberal arts college. The theater department is predominantly white, though we keep working on that. So what happened was kind of amazing. I taught a class called Diversity on the American Stage, Plays and Players. And within that class, some of the students, they were upperclassmen, decided that they wanted to survey the theater department around issues of diversity and inclusion and equity. And they did it. they went out and they went back in time. It looked at every single main stage production and who had written it, and if it was a woman, a person of color, went into the syllabi, what plays were we teaching, what monologues were being taught. Then they went and looked at other universities and looked at what they were doing in theater departments about diversity. And then they had an open forum, and all the theater professors came, and well, not all of them did actually, but it was, and out of that came a statement on our website. This is a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, on the website of the theater department, a statement about what was what's called aspirational, that what we wanted to have happen, and how it had to happen in terms of faculty who was on the and we had this as a goal in our department review, but it hadn't made it to the website, which is where you try to, bring people to recruit people. You're trying to recruit them with pretty shows and stuff like that. And so that went up there, and that all came out of students. So all they did was to ask questions. They just said, let's look at what we've done. Let's look at, and that's all public record. And so, and because it came from the students, of course, it was really hard to, you think you don't have power, but actually you have a lot of power if the students come up with that kind of information. And it's well done. They were smart. They knew what they were doing. They worked as a team. For me, as an educator, they knew how to do the research, right? And they knew how to keep people involved in it and keep people feeling like they were invested. And so that's my story.
That's awesome, because it's asking questions, but it's also just holding up a mirror to what's happening. It's just like, do you know this? Look, I did this work. Do you know? Are you aware? It's great. Do others want to speak to that? How to change culture? How to shift culture?
I will say that that all the time I've been spending on self-care really has made me calm and tender on the inside. Really, it has. I know you can't tell. I would say that, I mean, it's a collective and collaborative community effort. And I'm not sure exactly what the culture is. I wish I could add other questions, if we're talking about it being structural or social. I will say that bringing in marginalized or underserved or under-resourced or BIPOC communities is paramount. I will say that exploring those points of view with a radical openness and practicing attunement. I would say listening to collective wisdom, right, around you, and nurturing those needs. I'm a huge believer that you always go to the community first. What do you need that you're not receiving? It's engaging with each other beyond the consensus, right, and coherence and control in ways that are. Am I good? I'm seeing the little notice. Okay, great. Yeah, a dancing between identification and self-identification, right? All of these ways of just seeing people and hearing people, that alone, I think, is an act of disruption to our current status quo. And I think that ultimately that's why we're here, because we're hoping for that sort of connectivity and collaboration in a way that then breeds better, more inclusive art.
I'm reminded of there's a social location exercise that and it's in the Dropbox for the original session. If those of you watching have not done social location, it's super helpful because it helps you tap into all of the parts of your identity and recognize where you do hold power and privilege, and there may be some surprises there. So I totally recommend doing it regularly, because it does kind of help you ground yourself and figure out, oh, well, I wow, I do hold a lot of power and privilege, or like, oh, here are the areas where I hold it, right? So, Alex, were you gonna?
Yeah, I just wanted to add really quickly a couple of things, and you know, Camille, I love that exercise. It's so useful. But depending on who you are, I think I would also start with the question like, what is the impact if there is change? And what will it cost me and those around me to engage in that change? And can I find others also? Like I'm a strong believer you never do it alone, and you got to find your co-conspirators. And you have to find them with some positional power. You have to, and granted, that is not to say I think everybody has power. I think we don't even know how to leverage how much power we have, but don't try to do it all on your own. Find the people, have those conversations. And if you are wanting to make it a better place for a community that you are not a part of, I think you mentioned this, Donna, but it is so essential to not assume you know how to do that. And because sometimes people don't want something, maybe they don't want to be included in something, right? Or maybe they do. And so it's a practice even I'm learning. I serve predominantly the Latinx community. And like, sometimes, depending on the neighborhood, I need to ask, what do you need? And not come in thinking I know what you need, right? But I think the most important thing is find your partners, find your co-conspirators, and be strategic. Never enter a room without having worked out your strategy with other folks, ever.
That's great advice. We have 10 minutes left. So folks who are listening, if you have additional questions, I'm going to go back to the questions from the first round and just see if there's any other kind of big overarching things, but now's the time to get them in. You can use the chat, you can use the Q&A. So I'm just going to pull that up. Okay, so there is still this thread about telling stories, and it goes back to what a lot of you were talking about is what are some additional thoughts on who should be telling stories of marginalized individuals, both from a playwright perspective, director perspective, actor perspective. This goes to the statistic that Vicki shared as well. This feels like an area where a lot of folks are still kind of, there's movement here, right? Of like, who should be in the room? Who should be telling stories? Who has the right? Do you all have any other thoughts around, I'm sure you do, but would anyone like to share on that topic and what you all been thinking about? I see Peter, you want to take that?
I'll start. I think inherently the question is kind of odd in the sense of like who deserves, in the sense of I think deserving disguises a different question of, I think it's flipping it and being like, where has there been a lack of representation? Where have there been a lack of authenticity? Where has there been a lack of truth in voice being told and done? Because I think that's where it really stems from. I think anyone can work towards, and I don't even know if it's a right, but at no point do you get your stamp that says, great, you can tell like this group story. It's the constant conversation of like, how are you constantly engaging in that history, that knowledge, that experience, and listening to that community and that voice if it's not your own? Because if it is your own, then no one can tell you your experience is not your experience. I've seen tons of shows where people will come forward and be like, that's not the experience of like the Chinese community. And the playwright who's like, I'm Chinese, this is my experience. You don't get to dictate, like their own community dictates to them. And it's this weird dichotomy of like, again, it's not about who deserves, it's, that there is effort and consciousness and authenticity in telling those stories, but also recognizing the complete inequity that has existed in the history of our society. Those things are both separate but inseparable in today's time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I really appreciate that reframing. And I like the idea of it as a process and continuous examination. Other folks, anything else that you want to add to that? No? Okay.
Okay, no, sorry.
Oh.
Yeah. So this is, as you can tell by my my statistic, this is big issue. And it's something it's been part of my life for 30 at least years, trying to figure this out. I was refused training at Neighborhood Playhouse because I limped, right? So, so part of it is the pipeline in another sense, the pipeline to professional careers. Disabled kids are told early on, they're discouraged from the arts. I had a mother who, both my parents were performers, and she put me in dancing classes, when I, it didn't make any sense, but it was great. So part of it is the training, so is not there. And when you get to college, that's when you should like settle down and be, you're gonna, you have to pick something that's really real. So at that point, there's another self-limiting thing that goes on, that you're not gonna become trained. And I have friends who don't think any person who doesn't have a disability should write a play about disability. Bottom line, no exceptions. And on the other hand, I have, so there's a wide range of opinions on that, but there's something about that, ferocity of that position that has some truth to it. John Belusso, who is a wonderful disabled playwright, I think I talked about him last time. He said he used to, oftentimes people can't find a disabled actor that's trained to do these, language plays or whatever they are. So, so he would spend hours in rehearsal trying to explain what it meant, what the experience was, what the actor was going to be doing, because it's not as though people don't have an idea about what disability is. They have intense ideas about what disability is. It's deeply ingrained in it. It's one of the deepest go-to metaphors for life in America, life in the West. And so they, so there's that problem. I do want to, recently, Majok, M-A-J-O-K, Martia, she won the Pulitzer Prize for a play called Cost of Living. And before that, she did a play called Ironbound. So she's not a disabled person. She worked as a aid attendant for a disabled person. And she wrote this play that won the Pulitzer, 4 characters, 2 disabled, one, and the only white character was the bad disabled guy, the rich disabled guy. And her Ironbound as well really deals with class and money. She comes from an immigrant family from Eastern Europe. And so some people think that play is wrong. And however, she insisted on the 2 disabled roles being played by disabled actors. And of course, now there are people coming up who have training, who are getting MFAs. And I know that there's many, I look at Lynn Manning. I'm not saying that that's the only way to do this, but it is a craft that we have. And so those, Reagan Linton, there's several actors who have worked at OSF, continuing there, but certainly under Bill Rausch's legacy. he also worked with Lynn. Lynn wrote one of their plays. I'm going to go on. I'm sorry, I'm getting on. On the other hand, I'm going to start my semester this year teaching Anna Devere Smith and Twilight, because I think it's something about that compassion. There's many reasons I think it works when Anna does it as a solo person, taking on all those things. I think it's incredible. It's not as current as what's going on now, but for my students, I think engaging in an uprising like that in a really complex way should be a very important experience for them. So, and I know Anna Devere talks about that one of the things we do in theater is to take on other identities, to take on experiences and bring them forward. So, I in the unions, when I came in, the unions were working out, telling the SAG that the American scene had to be represented on, but it didn't give quotas. It just in the audition room, this had to happen. So I know I'm not talking about grassroots work, a lot of stuff that's going on that isn't about the industry and isn't about the regional theaters as well. So I actually think that that's still starting your own company and working with people and putting people together is still a really important way to develop talent. It's certainly what happened to me. I was refused training. I ended up in 2 people's theater companies, and that's how I got my training. But I will stop short of a dictum. I was also in a company where we used Mao's Little Red Book as how we ran our lives together. Criticism, self-criticism, and it was only when I hit academia that I found anything as rigorous and damaging as that approach to collective work. So I'm always cautious about rules. Okay.
Thank you, Vicki. We are almost at time, which is amazing. It's gone so fast. Truly could talk to all of y'all all day. I want to ask, this is a closeout that we do a lot in our department, and I'm going to ask it in the chat as well. And then I'm going to ask our panelists to close out with this too. A word, one word. I know it's very hard. It can be hyphenated because people always ask about that. What is one word that is in you right now after the first discussion and after this discussion? I'll put it in the chat, and then I'll start to bring up some words that come out of the chat as well. And guess when you have your word, you can go ahead and pop in with it while we're getting some out of the chat too.
Mine is rest.
Mine is impatient.
Some of the ones coming out of the chat are building, responsibility, impatience, activate, thoughtfulness, inspiring, restorative justice. I'll give it to you, Natalia. Encouraging, restore, hopefulness. Peter, Vicki.
I'm going to go with intentional.
Longing. Oops, longing.
Longing. Beautiful. Equality, community. Thank you all. Change. Community and change are 2 really good ones to end on, I feel like.
Absolutely.
I am so grateful to all of you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your emotional energy. Thank you for your perspectives. we really deeply appreciate all of the time that you've spent with us. And thank you to everybody who tuned in as well, for coming back and having more time with us.
If there are other questions, I know that I'm willing to respond to some, and I think the rest of the panelists are too, based on what we've been talking about. So please send them in, and I'll just listen to what Peter says and then vibe off of that, listen to what Vicki and Alex say.
That would be fantastic. Yeah, I think folks, if you have more questions, you can email them to me. You can put them in our Facebook group, and I'll get them back to the panelists.
Does someone want to just produce a podcast? Like, I'll get with y'all
Yes.
every other week and like just chat about this stuff over and over again.
Yes, please. That would be great. All right. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. We will see you soon.
Thank you, Camille.
Thank you.